Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. This is a show about how artists use technology to tell their stories, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today, we welcome back our guest host, music journalist Jon Burlingame, for another fascinating discussion on film scoring. This time, we're joined by composer Harry Gregson-Williams. He's here to discuss Gladiator II, which is the 7th film he has worked on with acclaimed director Ridley Scott. But I'll let Jon take over the introduction from here.
Our guest today is among the most sought-after composers by filmmakers in both Los Angeles and London. He's been nominated for BAFTA, Emmy, Grammy, and Golden Globe Awards for such scores as Shrek, The Chronicles of Narnia, Mulan, The Martian, and The Last Duel. He's with us to talk about his latest score, the long-awaited sequel to Gladiator. Welcome, Harry Gregson-Williams.
Thanks, John. Good to be here.
So, Harry, you've done several films with Ridley Scott, including Kingdom of Heaven and The Martian. What's he like when it comes to talking about and applying music to drama?
He's very consistent. He's and he's very sure. He's very sure about what he's trying to do, what story he's trying to tell. He talks to me long and hard about the characters, and he's never too specific about a musical direction. In fact, he rarely gives me too much temp track to worry about. And the more I work with Ridley, the more I tend to start pretty much at the beginning of post-production. You know, he hasn't really put his film together yet, but he's got various scenes that he's quite happy with. I know, for instance, on this film, it's quite similar to The Last Duel in terms of the very opening of the film, the setup of the film. There's a kind of preparation in The Last Duel where one knows that this duel is about to happen. Actually, that happens at the end of the film. But on this film, there's an amazing action sequence to open the film. And he gave it to me quite raw, very few sound effects, and quite long, and I knew that it would come down. So in that knowledge, one has to set sail somehow. So rather than wait for him to cut what was probably a 14-minute sequence of the Roman invasion of this North African city, we don't really know where it is. We know that, I know that it's going to come down, but you've got to start somewhere. I've always found that that leaving it, the longer I leave it in the knowledge that he's going to probably cut this thing down, the worse it's going to be for me. I might as well just get going and know that I'm probably going to be cutting my sequence down as he cuts his end of things down. So what was 12 or 14 minutes sequence, I think in the film ended up at about 8 or 9 minutes. That sort of thing can be very distracting if there's temp music that you're trying to follow. Whatever Ridley's trying to put across there. But this sort of sequence came to me without any music, and I find it really helpful because he's still shaping it, and any music editor is probably going to be chasing anyhow his cut. So what I tend to do is say, okay, well, here's this long sequence. I know it's going to come down. Let's go for it. So write music for what I see in front of me. Send it off to Ridley, whose post-production often is in his house in France. Via the internet, he sees that. And then he'll make his comments, which are universally positive to begin with. He doesn't focus on the things he doesn't like. He'll focus on the things he really does like. The instrumentation, love the energy here. After a meeting like that, hearing that, I'll think, well, I wonder why he didn't mention this bit here, which I quite like. So I had to read between the lines a little bit. So as the sequence gets more and more shaped into the final sequence, the music becomes more streamlined. And I find that without the distraction of temp music or any particular direction from Ridley to begin with, I can just set sail and see how it goes.
This is ancient Rome. And I'm wondering, in a project like this, is there research required? Do you spend some time thinking about what the sound of the place should be like, and whether or not you need unusual instruments or offbeat sounds?
For sure. So obviously, one of my starting points was to rewatch the original Gladiator film, and I have a listen to what Hans did on that.
Speaking now about Hans Zimmer.
Yes, and Hans Zimmer's much loved score for that movie. And actually, the conversation I had with Ridley at first was that this is a fresh movie. It relates to the first movie. Let's not make our first port of call anything to do with the first score, thematically or any otherwise, which was quite liberating. I knew we would circle back somehow. We'd need to lean on some of Hans's thematic material just occasionally. Obviously, we don't know exactly what the sound of ancient Rome was like, but there are various etchings, drawings, paintings that we can, and literature that we can look at and think, okay. So I found this chap in northern Spain, interesting chap called Abraham Cuapiro, who makes his own instruments based on what he would think they'd be playing at this time. So I actually found him on YouTube, of all places, searching through for unusual instrumentation. Got in touch with him, and he said, yeah, he could do something. He actually lived in northern Spain, quite a rural place, and it would be better if I came to him, because he certainly wasn't going to be taking his valuable, rather huge instruments to a recording studio elsewhere. So it being a Paramount film, first call was to the music department at Paramount. Is it okay if I just make a quick hop over there? They were very supportive. And actually, so I arrived over there, and at the same time, visited my friend on the way there in Zurich, Martin Tillman, who plays electric cello. And I had some motifs I really wanted him to play. So I took actually the first sequence that I wrote to picture, which was the Roman invasion at the beginning of the film. I took that with me, the long version of that with me, not worrying too much about how it was hitting the picture, knowing that that was all going to change, but just the colors, the textures that I was after. And arrived in Abraham's farmhouse. I was kind of worrying. It was a long way from anywhere. Rather abandoned, but great fun. Once I got into his barn, which he'd converted into a studio, he had all his instruments laid out, many shells, large shells, brass instruments, that one of which looked remarkably like a French horn that had been pulled out and elongated, and a canix, which was a carnix, which had a beautiful brass serpent head on it that looked quite threatening. Looked like you could probably use it as an instrument of war, but made some really unusual sounds. Beautiful. So I had him play over my track. we tried various things. And I brought those sounds back to my studio here and started to make instruments of them, instruments within the instruments, so that they were at my fingertips. And that's really where the fun starts, the colors and textures that one can achieve by manipulating these sounds. As I say, on that same trip, I visited Martin Tillman, who played this slippery, slidey, that only really an electric cello can do. It has this sustain that a regular cello, acoustic cello, can't do. I really wanted him to play on a little track I'd made for Macronus, so the Denzel Washington character.
One of the most interesting characters in the film.
Yeah, amazing. So having collected these sounds, I came back to base here and started experimenting with them. On that same trip, actually, I visited Madrid, I think it was, and I'd found a vocalist who I really liked called Antonio. I forget his last name now. Antonio Lizana. Wonderful vocalist. Again, he sang over the tracks that I had, which I didn't have too much music at that stage. I had maybe 10 or 15 minutes of music. And I experimented with his vocals. I was kind of circling the fact that I would probably want to get in touch with Lisa Gerrard at some stage.
Who had sung the vocals so memorably in the original Gladiator.
Absolutely. So, I had said to Ridley, I can't see any there's no negative really for trying to get some Lisa on the score. He said, no, you could have a go. But he was liking some of these new vocalists that I brought in. I did call Lisa, said, look, I may want you to sing on this. How do you feel about it? And she said, well, have you talked to Hans? So I said, well, obviously, yes. He was my first call after Ridley called me and asked me to do the film. And she said, well, if he's okay with it, I'm okay with it. Which is sweet of her.
Yeah.
So I caught up with her. I think they were rehearsing for their tour, Hans and her in Austria or somewhere. I caught up with her there and had her sing something resembling the vocal she had done in the original film, but I had rearranged the accompaniment. It's a good deal darker, and actually Lisa's voice is a little bit lower than it was 20 years ago, and quite raw, but just as exquisitely mystical. So yes, I'd collected all these, if you like, I had my artillery. Now I had to take aim at the film.
Before we go any farther, talk about Richard Harvey. I've often seen his name on period films, and I'm sure that he's probably an old friend of yours from London.
Yes.
And what did he contribute here?
Well, many ancient and ethnic woodwinds. He has a vast array, a collection of woodwinds, and he plays all sorts of weird and wonderful instruments. He's an amazing composer and musician. So I used to work for him in London before I came to the States, and I worked and had my early days as an assistant composer with Richard. So I called him. He played on a couple of my other scores, like Mulan. Played some Chinese instruments on that. So when I told him what the project was and the sort of sound I was after, again he dipped into his array of instruments and gave me various alternatives. Thematically, the very important what Ridley and I came to know as the DNA theme for Lucius is a high ethnic flute, a ney actually, and Richard played that thematic material. It never quite knows whether it's major or minor. Has this as it never quite knows whether it's major or minor, and this represents the kind of the DNA and the spiritual essence of the first movie, which we hear very early on in the film, actually before, over the credit sequence, in fact.
So that's kind of a subtle reference to the original story in a way.
Musically, it doesn't relate to anything from the first movie, but it's kind of the connection between the two stories, of which there is a very firm connection. Together with that, with Lucius being our main character in this film, he needed a variety of motifs and a theme. A fully blown theme to go with him. The DNA theme seemed logical that it should be with him, which is this high woodwind, which Richard played. Also, one of the first things that I wrote before Ridley even gave me the first cut of the film was a suite of music based on this descending seventh that I found very attractive that Hans used in his theme from the first movie. So dee da da dum da dum dee da da dum, this diving seventh. So I thought, well, if I take that, just those two notes, be dum, see what I can do with that. And I began to formulate an idea that if I could almost write a theme for Lucius that became Hans's theme from the first film. In the script, there's actually a line about 4 pages from the end of the movie where it says Lucius becomes Maximus. So I thought, well, we're not going to be using Hans's tune for, 80 or 90 minutes of this score. But towards the end of the film, if I could make Lucius's theme contain that descending seventh in its own way, in an original way, then it could become Hans's tune, and so that's what I tried. And when Ridley heard it, he was very happy. Yeah, I can't really repeat what he said down the phone, but no, he was very happy. He said, "Good, solved," because we wanted to understand how could the original theme from Gladiator appear towards the end of the movie and feel right. And the way I think we achieved that is by prepping it in a way that we took two notes, a little descending seventh, and used that within Lucius's theme.
So his sworn enemy is Acacias, played by Pedro Pascal. And are there certain sounds or maybe even a theme associated with him?
Yeah, absolutely. He's when we first meet him, he's a proud general. He's off taking over lands for the emperors. His thematic material is more conventional. He's quite a conventional character in so much as he's a general. He's a good fighter. He's the one who captures Lucius at the beginning of the film, and actually the MacGuffin for the movie is Lucius wanting to get back at him. And if you've seen the film, you know there's kind of an irony in that.
Can you talk a little bit about Denzel Washington's character, which is so interesting in the movie? He's kind of a power broker, in ancient Rome, and he is sort of on his way up. And of course he and Lucius spar a little bit, and then you can talk a little bit about what are the sounds that you needed for Denzel's character.
I wanted something a little slippery, something you couldn't put your finger on to begin with. He doesn't really he doesn't show his hand too early. We were immediately attracted to his character because he's very confident.
Oh, yeah.
But he's a sneaky chap. He is. He's plotting. Thematically, what I gave him was something that reflected that, his sneaky characteristics. A slipping and sliding electric cello and an electric violin played by Hugh Marsh, who's a Canadian, who's played on many of my scores. These instruments are really, really suited to kind of sliding glissando. We actually hear that motif before we meet those characters in the overture at the beginning of the movie, which was actually fascinating. A couple of weeks before I left to score the movie in London at Abbey Road, the movie used to start with Lucius's hand in the wheat.
Of course.
And that's how I thought the movie was beginning, until Ridley called me one day and said, "Look, Harry, I think we might need an overture from you." And I'm like, "Sorry, where would that go, Ridley?" He said, "Oh, yeah, no, I'll be sending you. We're gonna do an animated title sequence, and it'll just be music. Might be a little bit of sound, tiny sound effects, but it'll be over to you. How do you feel about that?" So I said, "Well, actually, as soon as you hang up, I think I better start on that." So yeah. That was really fun to do, but for the very reason that there was no dialogue to contend with. And very little sound coming from the sound effects department, because in a movie like this, well, there's always a trade-off between sound and sound effects and music in these gigantic battle sequences. Even as the gladiators fight these mad baboons, their sound is very high pitched. So I had to make sure that I could work in the right sonic territory to be effective in those action sequences.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, it's kind of I just wonder if you can talk about what kind of a challenge it is, because you have sound effects, you have sort of natural sound, whatever was
Yes.
there was on the set at the time Ridley was shooting. And there's a lot of fighting and battle work here. And I'm wondering, so you're pointing to the fact that you're sort of figuring out sonically where you can fit in. Is that right?
It is, and it's also always a process, because just like with music, nothing's complete until the very end. So one's got to start somewhere. The sound effects guys, often when we would go to the for months and months, as I was working on any scene that involved the Colosseum, it sounded like someone had dropped in Manchester United crowd at a football crowd. So there was a continuous and no texture at all. But slowly, as the sound effects department were engaged and the cut progressed, there was texture to that, and there was a reason for the sounds as you cut to a crowd. And they started to put together a beautiful tapestry of sound. So similarly with music, it's really difficult to begin with, to think, how am I going to compete with this crowd sound? Should I be competing with it at all? What can I add to this? But as I say, it's a process, because as time would go on, and each time I would get a new version of the film, Ridley would turn over a new cut to me. I go to a scene in the Colosseum and find that actually the sound had changed a lot. The rhinoceros, for instance, had its own very, very deep subwoofery type sound, so that it wasn't necessary for me to be in that realm at all. In fact, higher drums with a good thwack to them, played with the hands, would cut through really nicely and add something to those scenes.
When you're writing a score like this that has a huge range of sounds, does the fact that, do you know in advance if it's going to be in Dolby Atmos, and does that is that a factor in how you write?
Not a factor in how I would write music, but absolutely from the moment we arrived at Abbey Road to record this, Pete Cobbin and Kirsty,
who are sort of legendary recorders.
Yeah, absolutely legendary recorders and mixers. But they had kindly agreed to record this for me, and I was going to bring it back here to Los Angeles and have Alan Myerson mix it for me. So yes, their positions of their mics, and that knowing that we were going to end up with Dolby Atmos was really important to them, but didn't interfere with the way that I wrote anything. But it was great fun in the final music mix, positioning the sounds, and, a lot of the skill that my mixer, as I say, Alan Myerson, has really pays off in those areas. And usually I would sit there and be amazed at the sound, at how immersive it is. I'm not the sort of guy to come in there and start barking orders at a Dolby Atmos mix that I barely understand myself. But no, so long as I could focus on the balance of the music and exactly how I wanted the music to sound. And then the fun of positioning it, I leave that to the expert.
So there's a substantial choral component to this score as well. And I wonder if you can talk about why that is, and maybe a little bit about when you needed choir and when you felt you needed sort of solo vocalists.
Yeah. As you know, it's a great thrill for me to use vocals, choirs, soloists in my work. Now, yes, there was a necessity for a kind of Greek chorus, I felt, if you will. I used two different sized choirs, one huge choir, it's an ocean liner of a choir called the Bach choir. I think they're an amateur choir. think they're the largest amateur choir in London.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, they are massed. You know, they are
Meaning like over 100?
Yeah, and that sort of thing. You can have as many as you like, as many as you order. But I use them way back on Kingdom of Heaven. I use them whenever I possibly can, and they fill Abbey Road Studio One, and they have this huge, very magnetic sound. I'm really drawn to it because there's such a sense of humanity in there. It's like almost a microcosm of humanity right there. So I had them sing on various parts of the score. I had a much smaller choir, more precise, I think about 34 piece choir, singing some of the more tender moments. And then, as you say, the soloists I found were a great joy to me. Very early on, I was looking for a voice as an alternative to Lisa, so a female voice. And that was before I even had contacted Lisa, and we had decided to use her in a couple of spots. So I was looking for a female voice that I could use around Lucilla's character.
Right.
That would be sort of simpatico with that. And a friend of mine who lives in Tasmania said, I was talking to him about vocalists, saying, I have real difficulty. I've had a few wonderful singers come in here, but there's something not quite clicking with me. He said, look, there's this chap called Lior Attar. Now, he's a he. He's an Australian singer-songwriter, but born, I think, in Israel. So kind of the right neck of the woods for where we are, Northern Africa, Europe, that sort of place. Now, he has contemporary roots. He's a singer-songwriter, and I'm like, man, I don't need an Australian singer-songwriter on the score. I'm pretty sure I don't. He said, no. But I went to a concert of his the other night. He does something really special. As an aside, sent me, and so my friend sent me a couple of his tracks, pointed them to me, and he sings a falsetto. It was absolutely beautiful. Really tender, amazing. So one of the cues I'd written for Lucilla, which is a very sympathetic, quite sweet piece for muted strings, I sent to Lior, having spoken to him about it. He was very excited about it, and he sang over it. Sent me his tracks back, and again I edited them, did what I wanted to do with them, and I was astonished at the beauty of his voice. And I swear you wouldn't know that was a man. I played it for Ridley, and he absolutely loved it, and he felt that we should use it sparingly in the body of the film, but he'd like to use it he'd love to have the full version of what I wrote in the end titles. So that's where Lior ended up. So another vocalist, which was a fairly interesting story, I hope you'll agree. I was looking for a vocalist, a North African vocalist. And Ridley had said, look, at the beginning of the film, when we meet Arashat, is there something you can bring to her character that really, really puts us in that part of the world? So Northern Africa and Mediterranean. So I heard various vocalists, and again, it wasn't quite convinced. I then heard an a cappella track from a different score for a movie that was done, I don't know, 20 years ago or something, and on Spotify. I really loved the name. I've got the name written down here because it's not an easy name to say. We called her Gigi for short, but her name is Elagahu Shiobapu. She's from northwest Ethiopia. So I thought, that's the voice I want. I love this voice. But we couldn't find her. We absolutely couldn't track her down. There were all leads just came to an end. Maybe she's in San Francisco. Maybe she's on the East Coast. Maybe she's not well. There were various people said various different things. So I thought, well, hold on a second. Why don't we just license this piece? Why don't I take it was an a cappella piece, so I just took it right off the internet. I told Paramount, you're going to have to sort this out. Have to license this. But I didn't need a whole piece. Within this one a cappella piece, I found 2 or 3 phrases which I really loved, and I think I probably reversed them. I did some editing to make them exactly what I wanted. And one hears this, I think, on the track "Wheat" right at the beginning of the movie, right as we first meet Asher. I played it for Ridley, and he loved it. So Paramount's hands were tied. They better go and license this and get permission to use this snippet. But I would have rather have had her in person, but we just couldn't find her. So that was another vocalist we used. All these colors and textures are great fun, hunting them down, researching them. And actually, in this case, failing to find the vocalist. So using what I could.
But all of these sounds, I have to say, really make it special. Make this score not only fit the film like a glove, but are a kind of special listening on their own. I mean, I really loved the fact that you augmented the traditional orchestra and choir with all these really special and unique sounds that in many cases, I don't think I'd heard before.
That's great. I'm glad that you like that, and I'm glad that comes across. That's something that, when Ridley first calls me on a movie, similarly on The Martian or any of the other movies, it's always a pleasant call to get, first of all, to be asked at all. I'm happy about that. But I know what the next thing is going to happen. He's going to say, well, come and have a look at a rough cut. Now, when he says that, I know he's not in West Hollywood. He's in his chateau in France. So off I go to that's not a pain in the neck for me at all. So I jump on a plane down to Marseille, and then someone picked me up an hour and a half north of that. I'm with him. And similarly on The Martian, I'm forgetting some movies that we've done together. Oh, The Last Duel,
right?
Gucci. So it's great, and he as I think I alluded to, he's always leaves the path open. He'll talk a little bit about what some of the characters, but he's never one to bolt me into a certain direction. And if I start early enough, it's always possible for me to go in a certain direction, for us to decide, actually, that's beat a hasty retreat and go down another path. And I think that because I do fewer films now, trying to do fewer films and do them better, that would be the ideal. When one's trying to do several TV series and films all at once, it's just not possible.
Yeah.
So I'm not involved in that at all. So I don't know. I suppose I was on this film about a year.
I wondered about that.
Yeah.
Do you stay in close touch with Ridley throughout your writing process?
He'll set me off.
Okay.
And that initial meeting, spotting the movie, if you like, and then I'll scurry away and start making noises. I mean, it's the only, I love it when the talking stops and then it's music we're talking about. But you can sit in a room and talk about, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and my theory is I'll be able to do this. But rather actually make some music and then have that to discuss and have that to talk about.
Yeah.
And he's good with that. Once I've pushed the boat out in a certain direction, he'll always, he'll react, as I've told you, in a positive way. But also, there's nothing quite like being in the same room with someone when you play them your music. So Ridley comes across to Los Angeles often. So as if I got a tip off that he was in town, I'd have him come to my studio, or I'd go up to Scott Free and play him music. But just interacting with him is really where the juice is, because otherwise I think you're just sort of, you're in the dark.
You conduct your own scores.
Uh-huh.
What's it like to be conducting a huge orchestra and choirs in Abbey Road?
It's the most amazing thing. I can't think of a more pleasurable thing. I sometimes I'm asked, why do you conduct your own scores? Because you're not really a conductor. And
do people say that?
Well, yeah, I've had that. Well, actually, the lead French horn player told me that years ago. One of the lead French horn, not the current one. No, it's just true. I'm not a trained conductor, but having done hundreds of scores and spent thousands and thousands of hours in a studio recording situation with a click track, yeah, I like to conduct my own scores, and I can do it. But it is an absolute joy. I can't describe the first morning of the first day. I usually no headphones. I'll just be playing my favorite bits from the score with the orchestra, letting them get to know the thematic material, not worrying about recording. It's a bit frustrating for my recording engineer when I do that. It's like, you know what? We better start recording soon. We've got so much music to record. I mean, there's 100 minutes of music score in this film, which is not unusual for a Ridley movie. Actually, you know what? The House of Gucci had about 6 minutes of score in it. It had so many songs. Yeah, but generally, these period pieces do lean on music quite a lot, and it's great. It's what you want as a composer. I felt a bit lost on Gucci. I was like, well, what do you want me to do? He said, well, not much. I'm like, well, give me something. Yeah. So yeah, this and Kingdom of Heaven, it's a lot of score. But as I said earlier, I think that in this score, it was really important for me to try and dot the I's, cross the T's with the original score for the original film. And I think twice in this score, I hope that the audiences will get a warm and fuzzy feeling when they hear me quoting Hans's theme from the first movie. But it was, we just picked our moments. It's not prevalent, but there are a couple of moments where, yeah. I mean, I always remember going to, the second or third Jurassic Park movie with some of my kids. And, I thought it was all good. It was all great. And then suddenly John Williams' theme came on. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't think he scored those films.
No, you're right.
No, the scores were very good for those, the second and third film. But when his theme engaged, the film started to fly. So, yeah, hopefully in a couple of spots, the audience will think, oh, yeah, thank you for giving us that.
It works spectacularly well, and how you've explained, the whole transition, the whole sort of build up, and the subtle links to that score is wonderful. Harry, I can't thank you enough for spending time with us today. It's really fascinating to do a deep dive into this, and I think your discussion today, I think, helps to sort of deepen our understanding of how all of this works and why music is such an important component.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad to talk to you, John, as always.
Thank you so much, Harry Gregson-Williams.
Many thanks to Harry Gregson-Williams for joining us on the show today, and to Jon Burlingame for another excellent interview. And an extra special thanks to our friends at Paramount Pictures for helping us put this conversation together, as well as for providing the musical samples from Harry's amazing score. Be sure to check out Gladiator II, now in theaters in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, which really is the best way to experience the music of this film, in my totally unbiased opinion. We have links, as always, in our show notes. And if you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, be sure you're subscribed to Dolby Creator Talks. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about what we do at Dolby Creator Lab, head on over to dolbycreatorlab.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of the show, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thanks for joining us.